From the third-person, objective viewpoint, the world observed the unfolding drama. Julian and Elias were deeply in love. This was an accepted truth. For decades, Julian had been the unyielding head of a powerful corporate empire, a dynasty that held the nation's economy in a steel grip. He had stabilized markets and crushed rivals, hailed by his allies as a visionary. His only supposed weakness, the subject of whispers in shadowed boardrooms and on sensationalist news blogs, was his lack of an heir and his marriage to a man. That man was Elias. The official story, meticulously curated by Julian's formidable public relations team, was one of unwavering devotion spanning decades, a romance free of conflict. But the tabloids and the dark corners of the internet painted a far more lurid picture. Some spun tales of Elias as a corporate siren, a beautiful enigma destined to bring Julian's empire crashing down from within. Others claimed Julian had purged his own family, a bloody internal coup, to secure his position and have Elias by his side. These stories, at least, clung to a kernel of reality. A ruthless magnate and his cherished consort, a complicated, powerful pair. But the most outlandish fictions, the ones that made even a timeless being like Elias scoff, were spun from pure fantasy. He'd once had to discreetly arrange for a particularly imaginative blogger to have a series of unfortunate, but non-fatal server failures. Yet regardless of the narrative, every version of their story concluded with their profound love. No one ever doubted it. So when Julian, on his deathbed, asked Elias to be interred with him in the family mausoleum, Elias's agreement was immediate and without hesitation. The room, filled with stern-faced lawyers and stoic family members, was overcome with emotion. Even the old board member who had spent years trying to oust Elias from the company charter broke down, his sobs echoing in the sterile silence of the penthouse suite. Elias sat calmly by the bed, his hand holding Julian's, which was now little more than skin stretched over bone. He murmured softly, assuring Julian that without him, there was nothing left here. A final, brilliant spark ignited in Julian's eyes, a last flare of life fueled by the promise. As that light faded, he was gone. The nation mourned the fall of a titan. Elias followed Julian's casket into the grand, cold mausoleum. With the reverberating clang of heavy machinery, a massive stone door sealed them inside, bringing the epic of the magnate and his consort to its official close. A moment later, Elias kicked the lid of the sarcophagus a clean 10 feet across the marble floor. After stretching his stiff limbs, he located the hidden seam in the wall and began disengaging the lock to his escape tunnel. He had played the part of the grieving trophy husband long enough. It was time to return to the Empyrean and be a celestial again. As for the tyrant, he was merely a fleeting character in a long existence. Elias, known in his true form as Orion, was a celestial being of the Starlight Avians. A century ago, he had been tasked with undertaking a mortal trial of love to temper his spirit. He had planned on finding some simple, ordinary human to get it over with. But his best friend, Finn, had other ideas. At the last moment on the celestial platform, Finn had shoved him directly into the path of the mortal realm's most powerful heir, on his private hunting estate. Finn had later explained, with infuriating logic, that this Julian was the most aesthetically pleasing of all the potential trial partners. He claimed to have pestered the architect of fates for 3 days to get a preview of the candidates, insisting the others were intolerably plain. Finn knew him well. A truly unattractive partner might have made the entire trial impossible for Orion to stomach. Orion had argued that he was on a serious mission, not a cosmic dating show, and that no mortal could possibly be that captivating. He had been standing in a clearing, still fuming, when the sound of hoofbeats grew loud. The mortal magnate, Julian, reined in his horse, a powerful figure even then. A gloved hand raised a beautifully crafted composite bow, the arrow aimed squarely at him. Without thinking, Orion clutched his chest and sank gracefully to the forest floor, a picture of wounded fragility. His friend, still linked to his consciousness, had smugly pointed out the perfection of Julian's facial structure. Orion silently cursed him for his superficiality. He was a being of principle, not some shallow creature swayed by a handsome face. The magnate dismounted and extended a hand, his voice a concerned baritone as he asked if Orion was injured. As everyone knows, in the mortal realm, a man with Julian's power becomes principle itself. Orion took that hand without a second thought. He informed his friend that their connection was now terminated. He was going to be a trophy husband. The same decisiveness with which he had taken Julian's hand was now applied to his rapid escape from the tomb. He emerged from the tunnel like a groundhog, only to be met with a startled cry. A cascade of brilliant, crimson energy slammed into him, and he got a mouthful of dirt as Finn's wing buffeted his face. Finn, whose true form was a magnificent phoenix, seemed stunned to see him alive. He stood frozen for a long moment before letting out a series of heartbroken squawks and tackling Orion in a hug. He wailed about how he thought Orion was truly gone, that the architect had told him Orion's life signature had winked out. He sobbed, asking what he would have done if Orion had actually died for Julian. The embrace was so tight that Orion could barely breathe, and he frantically tapped Finn's arm, begging his ancestor to pull him out of the dirt before he actually suffocated. By the time Orion had been extracted and cleaned up, it was the next morning. Finn had spent the night weeping outside his door, his mournful cries echoing so convincingly that the entire celestial mountain believed Orion had perished. When Orion emerged, he was greeted by thousands of his kin, gathered with their luminary to mourn his passing. He swatted Finn awake and declared they were going to report to the architect. Orion and the architect were contemporaries, their relationship casual enough that Orion felt no need for ceremony. He strode into the architect's sanctuary, a place woven from threads of light and fate, and announced his return with a dramatic flourish. Usually, the stern architect would have materialized to scold him for the theatrics. But today, the sanctuary was unervingly silent. Orion was just beginning to appreciate the architect's newfound patience when Finn stumbled and rolled to the ground, his avian form bristling with alarm. Finn's brow furrowed, sensing another presence within. As Orion wondered what could startle a pure-blooded phoenix, a sudden breeze parted the ambient mist that usually shrouded the sanctuary's core. The view cleared. The architect stood there with an expression of utter despair, like a man who had just lost everything. Orion followed his gaze deeper into the sanctuary. Beneath the great orrery of fates stood a figure with his back to them. He turned, and a pair of profound, dark eyes, devoid of any emotion, met Orion's. The face was breathtakingly, soul-stealingly beautiful, and it was identical to Julian's. Seeing the cold look on the stranger's face, Finn instinctively stepped in front of Orion, shielding him. The tension in the air snapped. Orion's mind raced. His supposedly dead ex, the man whose emotions he had manipulated, was not only alive but was also a high-ranking celestial being who outranked him completely. Julian stared at Orion. Orion stared at the floor. If looks could burn, Julian's gaze would have left him bald. Finn, after a moment of confused observation, had a sudden realization and pointed at Julian, shouting that he must be the sister-in-law. Mortified, Orion instantly unfurled his wings, enveloping the still squawking Finn completely. He pleaded silently for his friend to stop talking. He wanted to live a few more millennia. He glanced nervously at Julian, wondering what his defense should be. Should he play the victim, a martyr to a flawed celestial system? Or should he argue his case, a defiant advocate for personal freedom? After all, they were both peers forced to endure these ridiculous mortal trials to prove their spiritual fortitude. It was all bureaucratic nonsense. He had a whole dissertation prepared in his head, an incisive critique of the trial system as a means of celestial evaluation, casting himself not as a heartbreaker but as a victim of a rigid and outdated institution. He was ready. He lifted his head. Julian walked towards him, dressed in simple, stark white. He seemed to radiate a light so bright it almost hurt Orion's eyes. Orion realized with a jolt that Julian was in mourning. For him, Julian stopped just before him. He raised a hand and gently touched Orion's wing. A surge of power flowed into him, causing his wings to retract against his will, transforming into an intricate feathered mantle over his shoulders. Julian's gaze fell, and his voice was a whisper. He told Orion that he had lied. His eyelashes trembled, a display of vulnerability Orion had never witnessed before. Julian's lips tightened as he added that Orion had promised he loved him. In all the time he had known him, Julian had always been a force of untamed confidence. He could decapitate a rival CEO in a boardroom takedown with a smile, earning the fierce loyalty of his subordinates. He could, after a few glasses of wine, verbally dismantle a host of academics, leaving them in stunned silence. They had resented Orion, hated him for being the male consort who had, in their view, corrupted their perfect corporate prince. But now, that prince looked like a defeated animal, every strand of his hair seeming to have lost its vitality. He gave Orion one last, deep look, then turned and vanished into the ether. It wasn't until Finn gently nudged his furrowed brow that Orion realized he had been standing frozen for a long time. The mist in the architect's sanctuary had already swirled back into place. The architect slowly retrieved Orion's trial record and pronounced it complete. He was a being of few words, and after a long pause, he added that a love trial isn't about who deceives whom. He asked if Orion understood what he meant. Orion's head throbbed. That night, it was Orion's turn to disturb Finn. He found his friend sporting dark circles under his eyes. Finn, it seemed, hadn't been sleeping either. His advice was crude and succinct. He told Orion to go sort it out with Julian. When Orion hesitated, Finn clutched his head and groaned, exasperated. He yelled that he had no time for their drama. If one session didn't fix it, they should try two until they worked it out of their systems. Then he slammed the door. Finding no constructive advice, only a very carnal one, Orion retreated to the back of the mountain. He sat under a giant, ancient redwood, chewing on a blade of grass and watching the moon. The tree's comforting warmth reminded him of when Julian had first brought him to his mortal estate. It had been winter, and only Julian's private wing was heated. Orion, hating the cold, had refused to leave. The rules of the estate were suffocating, and Orion, used to his celestial freedom, chafed under them. Within days, the staff assigned to him were complaining. Even his most trusted attendant warned him that his casual disregard for protocol would displease the master. That wouldn't do. Julian was his trial objective. He needed a good impression to foster the required love and affection. So he had his attendant bring him books on modern etiquette, planning to study the ridiculous mortal customs. He had barely read 2 pages before he fell asleep. It was a good effort, he told himself, but not repeatable. He had even dressed for the occasion, choosing his clothes and the lighting carefully, hoping to dazzle Julian with his studious beauty. Instead, Julian found him drooling on a stack of books. He awoke to Julian's voice. It was deep winter, and the morning light reflecting off the snow was blinding. He squinted, the spots in his vision slowly coalescing into Julian's smiling face. A heavy coat, Julian's, was draped over his shoulders, warm and smelling of a familiar, expensive cologne. Still half asleep, Orion grabbed Julian's hand, murmuring that he had come. Julian's hand was cool, and Orion pressed his cheek into the palm, saying he had been looking for him for a long time. Julian was silent for so long it felt as if decades passed. Then he cupped Orion's chin and lifted his face. He asked that if Orion had been looking for him for so long, then he should come with him. Orion blinked. The memory of the palace dissolved, replaced by the lush, ancient trees of the celestial mountain. He was leaning against the redwood, and several small morning birds were chirping on his shoulders. But the Julian before him was real. There was a faint, metallic scent of blood on him. Orion worriedly scanned him for injuries, but Julian simply scooped him up and started walking. When Orion asked where they were going, Julian's answer was a single, clipped word: the wastes. Julian's celestial home was in the Great Western Wastes. Orion knew it was a mountainous region, but he hadn't expected the residents to be in the very heart of the desolate peaks. The further they went, the more his heart sank. He felt like a bird-napped victim being taken to a remote lair. The winds of the wastes whipped his feathers into a frenzy, mirroring the chaos in his mind. He wanted to escape, but couldn't. When they finally landed, the sight of a palace made entirely of white, crystalline material, like a monument of mourning, filled him with a sense of foreboding. The white jade bridge, the ice-carved corridors, the crystal pillars, it all matched Julian's stark white attire. Orion cautiously shifted back to his avian form and hopped from Julian's shoulder to a bridge post. It was freezing cold, but for the sake of appearances, he endured it, elegantly lifting one foot to stand on the other. Julian promptly caught his foot and fitted it with a tiny, insulated booty. Orion was about to protest this assault on his aesthetic when Julian, without a word, used his power to conjure delicate frost flowers on the booties. He changed the flowers to yellow, and Orion, mollified, began to preen. But then he noticed it, a smear of blood on his own feathers. Startled, he instantly shifted back to his true form and grabbed Julian's arm. Julian hissed in pain. Blood was seeping through the sleeve of his white tunic. When Orion demanded to know how he was hurt, Julian stated nonchalantly that he had been dispatching some demonic beasts from the void. 108 of them, to be precise. He claimed it was just a scratch. Orion tore the sleeve open to reveal a gash that went down to the bone. He looked at Julian incredulously, asking if he called that a scratch. Julian, for once, looked flustered. He muttered that he had fought them all single-handedly. Orion told him he knew he was impressive, but asked where the medical supplies were so he could bandage the wound. To his dismay, Julian stripped off his entire upper garment. The display felt suspiciously like an attempt to seduce a bird, but Orion, with his resolute spirit, remained focused. He bandaged the arm, then promptly wrapped Julian from head to toe in a blanket like a burrito, leaving only his exquisite face exposed. Perhaps he should cover that too. Seeing his intent, Julian laughed softly and pulled him into an embrace, rolling them both onto the bed. Whenever Orion struggled, Julian would hiss in pain, until Orion gave up and lay still, glaring at him. Julian kissed his forehead, whispering that this was what Orion had once told him to do. He couldn't argue. It was true. He smoothly transformed back into a small bird and hid his head under his wing. Julian's wound healed with supernatural speed. By morning, it was gone. Orion, holding the now useless herbs, praised his remarkable recovery. Julian just said that yes, it made him very difficult to kill. He then added that it also meant he doesn't die. The statement felt disjointed, out of place. Orion sensed a hidden meaning, but when he tried to grasp it, his mind felt foggy, as if something was deliberately obscuring his thoughts. It was a strange sensation that had plagued him ever since he'd completed the trial. He made a mental note to see the celestial alchemist about it. For the next few weeks, Julian's home was a revolving door of powerful visitors. Orion had always known Julian held a high position, but watching the endless parade of formidable deities, he began to understand the true extent of his power. Even the notoriously short-tempered war god of Kunlun and the ancient dragon patriarch, figures of legend, came to visit. The three of them drank and spoke like old friends. Orion watched it all from his perch on a white pillar, pretending to be an ordinary bird. Late one night, after the guests had departed, Julian came to him. He was slightly unsteady, smelling faintly of immortal wine. He guided Orion onto his shoulder and began to walk, swaying slightly. Orion clung on for dear life as Julian stumbled to a halt, leaning against a colonnade before sliding to the floor. As he sat, a feather from his coronet brushed against Orion's face, tickling him. Orion shifted, accidentally dislodging the coronet, which rolled down the steps and fell into a lake with a soft plop. Julian's long, dark hair cascaded over his shoulders. He stared blankly at the ripples in the water. Then he turned his head and began to mumble, not looking at Orion. He confessed that when Orion had agreed to be buried with him, he had been ecstatic. But the moment he died, he was filled with regret. He said Orion was still so young, and it was wrong to ask him to die with him. But, he continued, Orion was his, and he didn't want to leave him for anyone else. So, for him, he would find a way to live. As he spoke, his body swayed, and he finally succumbed to the wine, slumping sideways. His head hit the marble with a solid thud. The wastes were cold. The celestial mountain was so much warmer. With a complex mix of emotions, Orion hopped onto Julian's chest, spread his wings, and transformed them into a large, silky blanket of feathers, covering Julian completely. This left his own head resting uncomfortably on Julian's chin. He watched Julian's face in the quiet of the night. A single firefly, a stray from some warmer realm, drifted down and landed on Julian's brow, glowing like a vermilion beauty mark. The sight compelled Orion to stretch his neck forward. He was suddenly reminded of a night years ago, chasing a firefly just like this one through the Imperial Gardens, when he had run right into Julian. The net he was carrying fell, and hundreds of captured fireflies took flight, filling the air like a cloud of falling stars. Julian had caught him by the waist, laughing, telling him to slow down. His laugh was beautiful, and he smelled wonderful. Orion, emboldened, had inhaled deeply at his neck, and Julian had laughed even louder. Orion's face burned, but the moment felt perfect. He had decided to confess his feelings. But how? I like you was too blunt. I like your face felt insincere. After much thought, he took a deep breath and asked Julian if his pet bird could do a backflip, and if he'd like to see it. It sounded more like a crass pickup line than a confession. But luckily, Julian was genuinely interested in seeing a bird do a backflip, and they had returned to the palace together. Orion stirred from the memory, intending to brush the firefly from Julian's brow. But just as his beak neared his forehead, Julian's eyes opened. They locked gazes. Julian's eyes reflected the cosmos, impossibly beautiful. He blinked, his thick lashes fluttering in a way that felt like an invitation. He asked softly what Orion was thinking. The question stunned him. The fog in his head returned, thick and disorienting. He felt nauseous. He tried to stand to get away, but his legs were weak, and he collapsed back onto Julian's chest. Julian propped himself up on one elbow, his other arm holding Orion steady. He pressed, asking what he had remembered. His mind was still spinning. He automatically replied, "Fireflies." Julian pressed again. And then, he remembered that he had truly, deeply loved Julian. The moment that thought surfaced, he blacked out. His consciousness drifted in a vast, empty darkness. He walked forward without direction or purpose until he finally gave up and sat down. If he didn't move, the darkness wouldn't feel so infinite. A profound, sourceless sorrow washed over him. He curled into a ball, burying his head in his wings, lost to time and space. Then, a series of frantic chirps cut through the silence. It was Finn's voice, yelling at someone not to use their powers so recklessly, worried they'd knock Orion out of the illusion. He heard the architect cry out as Finn yanked on his wing. Then Finn was calling his name. Orion looked up in shock to see Finn flying erratically towards him, dragging both the architect and Julian along. Finn was spitting bursts of phoenix fire like a bandit, forcibly illuminating the darkness. Julian was running, rushing towards him. But just as he was about to embrace Orion, he was thrown back by an invisible barrier. In that same instant, Finn and the architect vanished. The darkness around him solidified into threads of spiritual energy, weaving a complex web between him and Julian. The fog in his mind finally cleared. He remembered everything. He loved Julian, from the tips of his hair to the ends of his fingers. If the celestial conspiracy theorists were right, and all of creation was just a puppet show directed by a higher power, then Julian must have been sculpted by that power to Orion's exact specifications. When Julian had died, Orion hadn't been overly sad. For an immortal, death is not the end. His plan had been simple. Go to the underworld, retrieve Julian's soul, and bring him back to the celestial mountain. Among the infinite timelines, there would surely be one where Julian could cultivate immortality and stay with him forever. It was a flawless plan. He had arrived at the gates of the underworld, a place perpetually bathed in the crimson light of a blood moon hanging over the river of three crossings. He had moved through the shadows, not wanting to draw attention to his soul-snatching mission. When he reached the processing area for new souls, he saw two grinning apparitions approaching and hid. He overheard them whispering about a pitiable soul, a mortal emperor who had lived a full life and earned a peaceful eternity, only to have his soul annihilated as a consequence of a pact made for a consort. One of the apparitions shifted, and the jade locket at its waist caught the crimson light. It was the locket Orion had given Julian. In that instant, something hollowed out his mind, then shot down through his veins to his heart, squeezing it until he couldn't breathe. Instinct made him gasp, but each breath sent shockwaves of agony through his body. He forced himself to step out and ask the apparitions for the Emperor's name. They told him it was Julian. After that, his memories blurred. He remembered the apparitions' terrified faces, the chaos, the screams, and he remembered the blood moon, hanging over the river, mocking his powerlessness. He loved Julian, but if only he hadn't loved him, this wouldn't have happened. It was just a trial. He didn't love him. The elders were right. A love trial was a trial of death and ruin. He felt a nightmare being born from his anguish, a parasite that fed on his spiritual energy, creating a perfect, false reality. It dragged him into an illusion where he relived the day before he met Julian, over and over. No meeting, no love. It was tedious but safe. He should have wasted away in that illusion, his power completely drained. But Finn, sharing a common spiritual source with him, had risked his own existence to tear a hole in that reality, bringing the others with him. The day the nightmare was supposed to reset, Finn had appeared and kicked him off the celestial platform, creating the first crack in his prison. As his memories returned, the energy of the illusion erupted into a sea of fire. He was kneeling in its center, his wings pinned by the nightmare's power. Julian stood before him, the phantom flames consuming his body. Orion stared in disbelief, asking how he could be alive. Julian forced a brilliant, radiant smile. He reminded Orion that he had told him before. Fighting 108 void beasts was just a scratch. His body was being burned away, but his tone was still light, trying to reassure him. He repeated that he was very hard to kill, especially since his only thought had been to find Orion, to steal him back from the underworld and take him home. He reached out a hand. You see, he said, his voice cracking, we're a perfect match. I love you, Julian pleaded, the smile finally breaking as a sob tore through his voice. Please, I'm begging you, don't not love me. He sank slowly to his knees, his gaze fixed on Orion with an almost holy reverence. Please. When Orion officially awoke from the illusion, 3 months had passed. Creating the nightmare and breaking free from it had completely exhausted his power, leaving him a desiccated husk. The first thing he saw was the familiar ceiling of his own chambers. The second was Julian, asleep in a chair by his bed. Julian was wearing a celestial official's robe, but unlike the simple white he'd imagined, this one was a riot of color and embroidery. So flamboyant it could have put a peacock to shame. It was so dazzling that all the fledglings on the mountain had apparently gathered at the window to stare. Even Orion, just waking up, found his eyes drawn to it. Sensing his movement, Julian's eyelashes fluttered. His eyes opened, clear of sleep and filled with a deep, abiding affection. Orion suspected some of it was performance, but the thought that Julian had been dressing this beautifully every day while waiting for him to wake was undeniably appealing. Orion lifted a weak arm and hooked a finger under Julian's chin. Hey, beautiful, he rasped. Want to see a star do a somersault? With a sudden whoosh, Finn shooed the flock of peeping fledglings away from the window. The morning light was finally free to flood the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The light fell across Orion's hand, and in that quiet, golden moment, Julian caught it and held it tight. His reply, different from the one he had given all those years ago, was simple and sure. I love you too.